our featured panelist, Bryan Neider. Bryan is the CEO of AbilityPath, and he joins us in today's chat about providing exceptional programs and services. Bryan is the CEO of AbilityPath, and after serving on the board of directors for nearly 15 years. As a board member, Bryan served as treasurer, a finance committee chair, and became a strong advocate for Ability employment services. Bryan earned his BA in history at Santa Clara University and his MBA from CSU East Bay. Bryan is also a certified public accountant and the founder of Climb for a Cure, a nonprofit supporting diabetes education and outreach. Bryan is an active volunteer at both of his alma maters, serves on the boards of 3 technology startups, and he's an advisor to venture capital fund in Silicon Valley. Bryan lives in Menlo Park and is with his wife, and they have 4 children. Welcome, Bryan.
Thank you so much, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here tonight.
Yes, thank you. Just a little bit on the format. I'm going to be asking Bryan questions, and he'll be answering, and we'll tease out even more as see where it goes. First, Bryan, can we start with who do you serve and what programs do you offer?
Great. Yes. So we operate in San Mateo and Santa Clara County. We like to say we have a lifespan of services. So our programs start with early assessments, as well as a family resource center. We then have multiple therapy programs: occupational, speech, physical therapy, early interventionists. We operate 3 inclusive preschools. And then we have a wide array of adult programs, from independent living services to supported employment, day programs, community access programs. So we serve folks from the very youngest age into seniorhood.
Well, fantastic. So what makes your program so exceptional?
Well, I think that for all of us doing this work, it starts with having an incredible team. So we have very dedicated professionals, both within the therapy practice, our early childhood education teachers, our special education teachers, and of course, the folks in our adult services program are very passionate about the work. And I think their dedication really shined during COVID, and really showed their support and care for the community that we serve. So I think it starts with our people.
Well, fantastic. Can you talk a bit about the diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at AbilityPath?
Sure. So, going back to about a year ago, with certainly the situation with the murder of George Floyd, and I think some of the hate crimes against the Asian American community we've experienced during COVID. During the summer, we did a deep dive on the state of our diversity, equity, and inclusion in our programs. We certainly have had an inclusive focus for individuals with developmental disabilities, but people are not one-dimensional. They have many aspects to who they are, their background, their religion, their ethnicity. And so we actually brought in a third-party firm to do a full audit of our entire organization, top to bottom, on where we stand with the quality of our diversity, equity, and inclusion. That report was shared with all of our staff. It's shared with the board, and we have made a very strong commitment to be a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of what that means for our team, for those we serve, in our community at large. We just hired a manager about a month ago who's going to help lead our diversity, equity, and inclusion program. As we close our fiscal year, Dana, we went through, and every single one of our programs had to make sure that a diversity, equity, and inclusion filter was on part of our goals for every single team in the coming fiscal year. We redid many of our policies and programs. And what I'd like to say is, I think I wish we were further ahead on the curve of that when we started the process, But the reality is we're not going to wait to make change happen. We need to be active in change, and we need to be active allies for the community that we serve and for everyone in our community. That we want them to feel welcome in our programs for who they are. So it's a big part of our mission, and I will tell you, we've had a diversity, equity, and inclusion alliance, which is made up of employees. And it's been very hard work, and it's been to hear the experiences of many of our team members of what they've had to endure in their lifetime. It's been startling, and I think that all of us throughout our community have an obligation to work very hard to end systemic racism and to make people feel welcome for exactly who they are, and to be included. And that includes obviously the folks that we serve. So it's a very important part of a cornerstone and a pillar of what we want our organization to be going forward.
Well, that's fantastic. And certainly inclusion for the developmentally disabled community has been a big darn deal, and very important to focus on. Wondering what kind of obstacles you have encountered in that process in the past year, and what you've done to overcome them.
Obstacles in terms of which aspect, Dana?
Of implementing your diversity, inclusion, and equity program.
I'm happy to say that our teams have embraced it. Been very vocal in some messages that we've sent out going back to a year ago, and obviously since then. I've probably only received a few emails that were not supportive. And honestly, at some point, I think in life you have to take a stand. And the stand that we've taken is diversity, equity, and inclusion is critical to our mission. I think we have a moral obligation to ensure everyone in the community is fully accepted, respected, and included. And if there's some folks that don't like it, well, that's the way it's going to be. And but we're not going to back off. We're not going to back down, and we're not going to walk away from supporting all of our team members and those that we serve. So been very few, and the board has been 100% supportive. So I feel good about the direction we're going and the work that we're doing. But there's obviously a lot more to do.
Yeah, good. What does it take to run an organization like yours that serves the IDD individuals?
Wow, that's a great question. I think, I think in running, there's some things that are kind of universal. I think the first thing is that there is an element of authenticity about what we're trying to accomplish. And sometimes that may mean providing some messages about shortcomings that we've, had, but being upfront about that. And I think also painting a vision of what the future can be. And I think that there's an element of commitment to making change happen, because we work in a system, and maybe we'll get to this later, that has been chronically underfunded. But that can't be a roadblock or an excuse for not driving positive change and program improvements forward. So I think it is an element of perseverance, an element of compassion, a lot of creativity and innovation, and probably, I think being a great, really being a good listener for what the folks that we serve are telling us and what our team is telling us that they need as well. So I will tell you, I don't think I hit all of those all the time, but I try to hit all of them some of the time. And, I think that if you recognize we're all collectively a work in progress, I do my best and try not to be defensive when I have some shortcomings, and try to get better. So I think you got to do that too.
Good. Astrid Daub, in her book, put forth the notion that the difference between a, a high quality program and a average or not so good program is staff attitude. And you have great programs. I'm wondering how do you ensure that the staff at AbilityPath have that, great attitude?
Well, I think the kind of great equalizer in that is having a culture that fosters that kind of approach. And so I think after some point, either people join in that exuberance and having a positive attitude, or they are the organ rejection from the team around them may actually let them know that this is not the place for them to be. So I think the team actually helps set the tone and the tenor for having a positive attitude. And one thing that we've tried to reinforce that I think has been helpful is that our role is to be life coaches, right? And we sort of take that approach. We're here to help the folks that we serve reach their full potential without limitation. And if we're life coaches, it's a very different kind of role in how we think about our role of serving.
Right. That's great. What are some of the challenges that a service provider like AbilityPath faces?
I think it's one that we probably all face, being in the Bay Area in particular. It is cost of housing for our staff, for those that we serve, having adequate housing for both the community at large and our teams. I think commutes have been an issue. So if folks are living across the Bay or from South San Jose commuting up to where our locations are, that's been a challenge. So I think most of them are structural. And then, we're going to get to this probably a little bit later, but just the chronic underfunding has been a challenge on how you manage that. So those three things, certainly COVID put a pause on the commute and maybe a pause on rising rents. But those issues have been here for a while. And I think sometimes what gets forgotten is the same impact is hitting families and those that we serve. So for example, for children's therapy, we may have a parent that's working a job that's paid based on the hours that they work. And if they're having to take an hour off for the commute and an hour off for the therapy session and an hour more to commute back home, they've just taken, close to almost a 10% pay cut that week for their child to go get therapy. And a lot of it, 2/3 of that was related to commute times.
Wow.
So things like that are really important to understand how it works on the entire community that we serve and trying to understand better ways to serve. So coming out of COVID, we're going to make sure that we keep the ability, in this example I was giving, to provide teletherapy, because a lot of families liked teletherapy because, you never know what the situation is for them personally. So it's going to be an option we're going to keep so that it helps meet their needs, and their child is still able to get access to the services that are so important for their development.
So let's get to the chronic underfunding. It seems like it's kind of the elephant in the room.
Sure.
What's going on with the state budget?
So the latest that we have as of this morning is the State Assembly and the State Senate have proposed that the rate study or funding study the state did, the Department of Developmental Services did several years ago, they're proposing that the full recommendation be implemented over the next 3 years. We don't have any inkling what the governor is going to do with that yet. So maybe something happened this afternoon that I'm not aware of, but our understanding is the governor is reviewing all of the budget, and we're not sure where the developmental disability system sits within that proposal. As you know, the system has been underfunded for the better part of 20 years. To give you an idea of what that gap is, The gap identified by the study the state paid for was about 1.8 billion, which is nearly 20% of the entire system. So I don't know any business that can operate at a 20% operating deficit from what they need, based upon their own study, with rising costs for housing and cost of living for our staff. And yet you think about what we've done, it's remarkable how resilient and how creative every service provider has been to keep things going. And in a weird way, that's probably been to our detriment, because I think that sometimes when it's come to the budget, they maybe feel like we're crying wolf. When in fact, there's been a lot of structural investment that has not happened, which is necessary. And we've seen the crisis really play out in the last 3 or 4 years. And I am really guardedly optimistic that we're going to see some funding coming back into the system that is long overdue, Dana.
Yeah, we've certainly, seen that chronic underfunding limit capacity. And as a, demand, for instance, for housing for adults with disabilities continues to go up, the capacity just hasn't been there. So, well, what can our listeners do? Is there something they can do to help swing this in favor of what's been proposed by the legislature?
Sure, there are a couple of things. The first thing is, I think you probably have it on your website. We have it on ours. We have a tool that you can go in and easily fill out your name and email, and a message will go straight to the governor that will tell him that you support the funding of the rate study gap that the Assembly and Senate have already approved. So I'd say check out the website. You can go to the ARC of California. They have it on their website. CDSA, which is again a service member organization. There are multiple places they can go. Go in and fill it out tonight, send it off and get it to the governor. The last time we had a major campaign like this, we had, I think, over 40,000 letters and emails that went to the state assembly and state senate to provide funding relief. So I'd say do that if you can, and reach out and let them know how important this is for our system.
Well, fantastic. Any other, areas that I missed that, our listeners might be interested in?
Sure. One other thing on kind of this funding challenge, we have a very robust development team. We have to raise about 10 to 15% of our funding for our programs through donations and donors. So if it wasn't for the generosity and community support, that already, we're about a $20+ million program. It gives you an idea of what that funding gap is at the state level. So if it wasn't for donors and supporters and grants from various foundations, it would be a real challenge to be able to keep all of the programs operating at a high quality level. So we're blessed to have a very supportive community that allows us to do that. Great.
So is there anything else that that folks can do to support Abilities United? Obviously, the donations really help and are important, but what else can people do?
Yeah, there's always, now that we're coming out of COVID, there's always volunteer events. We have various activities throughout the year. I'd encourage folks to check out our website at abilitypath.org. One word, AbilityPath. And there are all sorts of volunteer opportunities. And I think if it isn't for us directly, I think for both of our agencies, Dana, it's wherever you can to have an inclusive mindset. So whether or not that's employment, if it means you have a child in a program that maybe there's a special needs kid in the class, include that kid in a birthday party, include them in inviting them. I've been in parent groups where they've talked about what they described as the shrinking social circle for special needs parents. And they said as time goes on, as their kids age, the invitations to participate in events with their friends' kids started to shrink. So I would
Yeah.
encourage everybody where you can, be inclusive in your mindset in all aspects where you can bring people in to be part of it. And I think that's a great way that I think carries on our mission for everybody.
So essentially to be inclusive in everything, uh, anywhere, any place, anytime.
You bet. You know, absolutely.
Great.
And I think it makes life more enjoyable for everybody, right?
Yes, absolutely. We all want to be included,
Yeah.
don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
fantastic.
So gentlemen, this has been a very interesting talk. We have just about a half an hour left of our talk for this evening, and we do want to open up the conversation for any question and answers that there are. Thank you so much, Bryan and Dana. This is a very
Thank you.
interesting conversation. There's opportunities here now. If you're joining us as an audience member and you just want to ask a few questions to open up your question and answer panel, and you can type your questions in either anonymously or you can type it in as yourself, and Dana and Bryan are going to be answering them live on the air. Of course, in the panel here, one of our LSA employees has posted a link again to Bryan's website, AbilityPath.org, and also to Bryan's profile where you can interact with him directly. And those things are available for you anytime. You don't have to wait until the moment is over for this chat. You're welcome to reach out to him now if you have a personal matter in which you want to talk to him about. And then also we'll be sharing our information again with you in case you have something that's a little more specific than what this talk is. You can reach out to us at lsahomes.org, and we'll be happy to talk with you. So yeah, first question's up. Let's see. All right, so someone wants to know, what is AbilityPath's success with corporate sponsorship, and what does it take to get significant fundraising initiatives with corporations? And that's a great question.
That is a really good question. I think we've had good success. So there are two places where corporations have played very important roles for us, and I'm certain for many other organizations. One is we have a kind of a marquee fundraising event each spring. It's called the Power Possibilities. And we've had quite a few corporate sponsors that are lead donors and underwriters for that event. Many of them have been employment partners that have supported our employment program on their campuses over many, many years. The other is building relationships with corporations from volunteer events that end up leading to support for employment opportunities and or engagement in fundraising events. One that we were just talking about earlier today, in fact, is pre-COVID, we had an aquathon. And this was swim teams primarily sponsored and put together by local corporations. So folks at Google, folks at LinkedIn, Intuit, and others would put together swim teams. And we're fortunate they picked our mission to support, and they helped generate a fundraiser, but that's how they got engaged. And obviously their donation along with corporate matching gifts have made a difference. So I think it takes a while. It's easier to work that with someone that you may know in the company. Many of the larger corporations have community affairs folks, community relations that help oversee those kind of activities. The other thing that's happened in the last few years is most large employers have created employee resource groups. So they will be topic-based, usually employee organized, and everything from an employee resource group or ERG. I've had a chance to speak at a couple for the special needs community for those companies' employees, and talk about what we offer, talk about other services that are out there from other providers. So that's another way, if you have an opportunity to talk to them with an employee resource group, you can share your message and your mission with them. I hope that helps.
It's great. This question, thank you so much, Bryan. And this question has actually come in multiple ways. I have one both in the chat, also in the Q&A here, but I think it's for sounds like it's for both of you. And it's talking about the way that your organizations have adapted services to meet consumers' needs during the pandemic. Another one wants to specifically talk, another person wants to specifically talk about company culture and how it's been affected by the pandemic for both LSA and AbilityPath. So either of you can answer first. But I think that if we can talk, one, about the company culture and how it's been affected, and then two, about how we've adapted services to meet the consumer's needs.
Great. Why don't I go ahead? So I mean, I think the pandemic, definitely challenges our culture, whether it's what we're talking about ourselves individually and our families, or whether we're talking about the organization, because it forced us to, cut down on human interaction and being out in the community. And so I think it was a challenge from the get-go. Some of the ways that you can overcome that, and we've certainly used this in programs and amongst the team, is to try and up the communication using video tools like Zoom. And everybody kids about Zoom fatigue, but it sure helped a lot to put people together face to face, virtually. And whether that was the residents in our homes with their families, or with their friends, or with their programs, their day program. And so I think all of that really, helped, soften the impact. We're already seeing, as things are starting to open back up, a lot of smiles and a lot of excited people that, do really miss being engaged and included in some of the activities that they knew and loved from before. So we've got work to do to re-engage, and hopefully re-engage in a better way, not just return to old ways, but hopefully move the needle, continue to move the needle forward. Yeah, Bryan, how about you?
Yeah, very similar experience to what you described. And I think the lack of connection certainly, I think, strained relationships, and it was more of a longing to see people. And you sort of notice that whenever there's an opportunity to get together in some setting, even with as a few people being in the office at the same time, picking things up, it's like you're on a desert island and you had seen somebody for the first time in a year. Pretty remarkable. And I think the experience some of our staff had seeing participants in person, and I'll talk a little bit more about when that would take place, same sort of thing, just this joy of seeing people again. So I think it was hard to stay connected, but I think as we come out of it, while we've all been fatigued at points throughout it, when you look back, I think it's the importance of having a higher calling. And the higher calling is to serve. And when our teams have looked back at what we were able to do during the pandemic, there's an enormous sense of pride, but also an enormous sense of satisfaction of, you know what, I worked really hard and it was tough, but I made a difference in somebody's life. Our preschools have been operating since June 15th, a year ago. We had over 60 adults that we serve in employment programs that have been frontline workers throughout the entire pandemic. We showed a video of their work. Again, job coaches still seeing them that entire time as well and supporting them. We showed a video at our fundraising event that we had in person, smaller number of people. There wasn't a dry eye in the place when we showed the video of all those participants working and sharing the pictures of them and what they've done through the pandemic. And I think that it brings us back to our mission. And I don't know if Dana feels the same way, but to a certain degree, for me, I feel like this mission found me, and I feel blessed to be able to be doing this work. How often do you get to be able to spend your time and energy trying to make a difference and help people out? And I think our teams feel that same thing through the pandemic. And that doesn't mean there wasn't a bad day of Zoom and you said, this is the last time. I'm fried. But in retrospect, we made it to the top of the hill and people feel good about it. And we now see that kind of camaraderie coming back, like we went through the war together and we survived.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I would add, maybe the mission didn't find me, but I certainly was led to it by my son.
Right.
And he led me in the direction, and I came to realize that there really could be done better. And that there was just an unbelievable chance to make a difference and to give back.
Well,
And
your background in tech, I mean, in a way, it led you into a leadership role in this area.
right,
Even though
right.
you had a personal connection. I think it's interesting that your talents have all been directed, in service of the community, which is awesome, Dana.
Yeah, it sure feels it feels good. Yeah, thank you, Bryan.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think you two, again, some of the sentiments being shared amongst all, including some of our attendees. There is a comment and a question that just came in that is saying, it is wonderful to see AbilityPath and LSA's collaborations. What needs to be done in our community to increase this kind of collaborations? Kudos to both agencies.
Yeah.
There was a follow-on, Hadia, on the pandemic. And so within about 30 days, we had flipped our entire therapy program to teletherapy. And that's several hundred families that we serve with teletherapy. The preschool, before we went back to being in person, was doing virtual classes and circle times with with children throughout the week for the better part of a month and a half. And adult programs moved and created over 170 virtual classes. And probably as of the count last month, have delivered over 5,000 activity packs for folks that may have been challenged with logging into a virtual program. So they created and put together and delivered activity packs every week. The Family Resource Center held virtual parent group meetings. They did assessments virtually. It was remarkable what people did, and that was all done in about a 30-day window. Now, if we'd said you're going to have to figure this out without a pandemic, it might have taken a lot longer. But the fact is, people got to work pretty fast, and I'm still astounded at what they accomplished and how effective it was. Over 170 virtual classes. That's just amazing to me.
Yeah. I guess a comment on collaboration, and I guess it's always been my philosophy that we're better together, and let's not reinvent the wheel. When we wanted to offer a day program, we looked around and we found the best in breed to be the AbilityPaths program that offered to young adults. It was not strictly facility based, and they shared and we, copied, from or took advantage of all their learnings and experience to craft a program that would start out where theirs had evolved over many years. So that's the kind of collaboration that I do think makes us all better.
Yep.
I also see a question about Sacramento, and I got to tell you that for the past almost 10 years, I've been on a DDS, Department of Developmental Services Task Force, and it's some of my best and most frustrating work. And it seems to be just an ongoing challenge to get the politicians and the staff in Sacramento engaged at the right level to solve some of these problems. And I guess it ultimately, it's a priority, but they have so many different priorities that it takes everybody, not just those with IDD children, but basically, all of the friends and everybody who's around this community to take that message to, their local assembly person or senator, that this is important, and that the work, has been done. The rate study was done, they understand exactly how those rates penalize providers operating in high cost of living places like Santa Clara County. They understand how they're underfunded in terms of allowing service providers to pay a decent wage to staff. It's literally just having the willpower to go ahead and implement everything, all that work that was done. And so we need to keep vocalizing that and vocalizing it at every opportunity.
Agreed. Yep, good
Bryan,
point.
do you want to add to that?
Dana really covered. I think there's an element of, there was a movie called Network, and I don't know how many years ago it was, but there's one of
my
the
favorites.
characters in there had a comment about, I'm mad at someone, I'm not going to take it anymore.
Yes.
There's a piece where we as service providers can provide the feedback. We really need families and the folks that we serve to be very vocal that they're unhappy with the state funding. It's one thing for us to say it. It's another thing for coming from consumers to hear directly from them about making a change in Sacramento to improve the system. So again, I think we talked earlier, Dana suggested an idea about letting Sacramento know that we need funding. Participant consumer voices are the most powerful.
Yes, and probably the most impacted by this in the state is close to 800,000 DSPs, direct support professionals, and it's particularly hard to get their voice heard, and no one wants to connect the dots that all of these individuals work for service providers, and service providers cannot pay them higher wages and benefits if the rates are constantly frozen or increase at a rate that's less than the cost of living. It's just the math. And yes, we all do our very best to to fundraise and to get grants and to be as efficient as we possibly can. But at the end of the day, rates you have to allow for the cost of services.
Right. I want to broach this subject really quickly. I know that our time's dwindling here, but there was one or two more questions. Might not get to the very last question today, but it's okay because you have our contact information. But I want to kind of pivot back around, and I've actually been thinking about this a lot lately with the fact that this is a rewarding experience for, well, people like me, like millennials. You get much more back than you're able to give on a regular basis. I heard one of my coworkers say, and doing this type of work, whether you're in the field as a DSP or doing back office things. And one of the things that I think is a trade-off is the culture. Bryan, you've already talked about it at your organization. Dana, we know personally that the culture is, LSA is a tight-knit family, even being over 200 employees, very tight-knit and very close. And that makes some of the hardships that you can go through for lack of wages and things like that, it makes it a little bit easier to bear. Bryan, back in your talk when you were sharing, when you and Dana were talking, you talked a little bit about employee listening devices. And you didn't really get a chance to get into specifics. Someone wants to know about what those listening devices are in order to improve employee experiences. What types of things do you put in place in order to listen to them? Do you do town halls? What happens
Sure.
to manage that?
No, I'm glad you asked that. I saw that question. I was hoping I'd be able to get to it, so thank you. So we do an employee survey, anonymous, with every team. We do an individual team survey. So essentially twice a year, organizational wide, and then individually within each unique discipline. So therapists will have one, adult programs, et cetera. We have town halls. We take the surveys very seriously. I mean, the comments and
sorry,
feedback.
Bryan.
Yeah.
Sorry, how many employees are these?
300. We have 300.
Oh, wow. Okay. All right.
We have town halls. With COVID, I wasn't able to drive around and go see every one of our locations because I really enjoy doing that. That's certainly another way to do it. I have held open Zoom hours for people to dial in, or open office hours for people to stop by. Typically, they'd be on a Friday. We do. I attend multiple manager meetings, some staff meetings, and then in this last year, we created for our own organization, the employee resource groups for self-organizing groups with however our teams want to identify. And so those are another way to get feedback. We have the DEI Alliance Committee, which has been very important in providing direct feedback to us on our organizational health in the DEI area. They've had a great influence. They drafted our DEI statement, which you can see on our website. So we use all those tools. And I think assumed in all this is you have to have a culture that feels comfortable sharing the truth. Because it's one thing to have an anonymous survey that leaves things out. It's another to hear a story from somebody that thinks something needs to be changed. And so part of it for myself and for managers is being able to be comfortable with hearing things you may not want to hear, but you have to hear. Because people are reluctant to tell you sometimes the truth for fear of reprisal, or you may take it the wrong way, or you take it too personally, when in fact they're trying to share with you because they care. They care about the organization. So, and that's not to say that we aren't all human and sometimes feedback hurts, but guess what? I'd rather hear it and be able to change it than not hear it and have everybody talk about it behind my back. Right? So you got to be willing to listen and hear the hard stuff and make people feel comfortable having shared it with you.
Nothing says I care about your opinion like putting up thousands of microphones as you've done and also driving around into individual locations in order to ask people questions. So thank you so much for answering that. Sure. This final question is coming from the audience, but then I have one more for both of you, one more surprise question. And since you're the first fireside chat, Bryan, you're going to be our prize.
All right, I'm buckling up. I'm putting my seatbelt on.
So before that surprise question, we just have one more question, and it's for both you, Dana, and for you, Bryan, where it's someone's asking, group homes and small providers have really struggled with inadequate funding. Is consolidation a solution? What are the pros and cons? Dana, why don't you answer that first, and then we'll go over to you, Bryan.
Sure.
So that's a totally timely question, and literally just 6 weeks ago, a small provider approached us because they were looking at going out of business. They were not able to find staff, and literally we're in talks to make that organization part of ours. So I think there is something to the notion of scale. You know, sometimes bigger is not better, but certainly bigger can be more economical, at least in terms of certain areas. But it's particularly difficult for a small provider because they have all the same problems the bigger one has, but less resources to be able to throw at solving them. So I don't know what the real answer is, but I think if we continue to not get some resolution on the rates side of things, it's going to happen more often. And it always comes with a huge impact on the people. This particular home has 4 individuals that have lived there for upwards of 20 years. And the possibility of it just closing, with 3 weeks notice to find something else it's heartbreaking. So yes, I think there is, well, as an organization, we're certainly going to do what we can to continue to grow. When I came to LSA, we had 3 homes, and we have 14 today. And it wasn't easy to grow, but we grew by partnering with donors and with the organizations that we work with to do that in a in a thoughtful and in a way that we believe is sustainable.
Great. Bryan?
Yeah, I think mergers are absolutely necessary to improve the overall delivery of service. If you think about all of the infrastructure that multiple organizations have, there is no efficiency in that, and that means that's cost is taken away from going into staff salaries. And so we've done 3 mergers, if you will. 2 smaller ones. We had a therapy one, and then we took over a program that had to close its doors last September in COVID. And then in 2019, we did a larger one with Abilities United and AbilityPath, and that was a much larger merger. But what we were able to do was the savings from the administrative functions and everything kind of in that allowed us to significantly increase compensation for all of our staff. So pretty much everything that we saved from that area went right back into programs, either program investment, laptops, smart devices to do case management, and staff salaries. So it's very different than a traditional merger in a for-profit space. So I think one of the pros and cons assessments right up front has to be, is there a meeting of the hearts, right? Do the organizational cultures blend together well enough to where they're going to be able to carry the mission out? Because if the cultures are too far apart, it's going to really impact, I think, service and employee morale in a very negative way. So, I think they absolutely have to happen. It's just a lot of duplication of so many areas. Think about it: accounting, HR, IT, marketing, development work. All that stuff becomes a real challenge if it's duplicated over and over and over again versus actually being able to put that back into staff.
Sure. Well said. So we're just about at time. So each of you have a minute each to answer this question. It's not too challenging unless there's a million things that you'd love to say. Dana, we'll start with you. If you could wave a magic wand right now and change anything at all about the way that we provide services in the IDD community, or that services are provided. Of course, we've already talked about funding. And if you have to pick that one, that's great. But if you could wave a magic wand and change something, what would it be? And we have about a minute on the clock.
Sure. You know, I guess it's in the whole area of you know, regulations. Adult residential facilities, you know, have to be licensed, they have to be vendorized, and there's just so constraining at times that, and so I think, you know, some additional flexibility would allow us to be even better. I mean, the classic might be that, you know, meeting the minimum staffing hours when there are more hours than are needed to provide the right level of care and support. But you got to go ahead and provide them, because otherwise you could be, you know, bad things will happen. So a little more flexibility. We unfortunately live in a sometimes overly bureaucratic systems, and I think that wastes a lot of money. So that would be my bureaucracy wand, and I'd wave it with some caution, but it would come in handy.
Don't hit anybody. Good to hear. Your lips to God's ears. Bryan?
Yes, so with Dana's wand, we're going to get the funding. So I think my wand is really more around society's perception of what's possible for the people that we serve. And I'll use two examples. One is when Special Olympics first started, there were very few events. The population we served didn't change. What did change was society's perception of their ability to participate in nearly 100 events now versus a half dozen. And the records that they're setting, the abilities that they're demonstrating, have always been present. It's been society's limitation that they put on the people that we serve. And we did a thing with Genentech where we had job coaching, interview skills, and all the folks that we serve that were participating put together dream boards. And on those dream boards, human aspirations are universal. It doesn't make any difference who you are or where you live. We want friendship, we want love, we want happiness. We like beaches, we enjoy the sun, we love dogs and cats. Some people like fancy cars. And the reality is that we hold back the people that we serve by not thinking big and listening to them on what their desires are. So I would ask society to think a little bit differently and listen harder to believe what is possible and make it happen for the folks that we serve.
That is awesome.
That's inspiring.
Well, it is very inspiring. Well, we're just about at time. And I want to thank everyone who's joined us, especially for this very special talk. Hopefully, more to come in the future as we look to do this on a yearly basis. So Bryan, thank you for being the very first of our fireside chats.
Hadia, thank you. You did a great job of organizing this, and Dana for hosting and putting this together. Really appreciate all that you've done to make this happen.
Very much so, a pleasure. Bryan's information's up on the screen and again in the chat. And then of course, you can always reach us at lsahomes.org. It was an absolute pleasure, Bryan and Dana.
Yes, thank you, Bryan.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you, Hadia.
Join us next time. For July 1st, we'll be having Astrid Du, which Dana referenced already in our fireside chat, wrote the book, and she's the author of Ability Innovation. Should be a very, very inspiring chat, just like this one, where we're going to be talking about solutions and innovative approaches to placing an IDD loved one in housing. Thank you again, gentlemen, and thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Good night, everybody.